Picture this. It's 1918. Britain has just won the Great War. It was a victory built on this incredible, unprecedented national unity. But then fast forward just 1 year, and all of that unity, it's completely shattered. The country went from being partners in a war to bitter enemies in peace. So the big question is, how did it all unravel so fast?
I mean, it's a really jarring image, right? You've just finished the war to end all wars. And what happens? The British government is rolling tanks through its own streets in cities like Glasgow. We're not talking about deploying them against some foreign enemy. No, this is against its own citizens. This wasn't some minor squabble. This was a full-blown crisis, threatening the very fabric of the nation. It just makes you wonder, what on earth happened here?
So, to really get a handle on the explosion that was 1919, we've got to rewind the clock a bit. We need to look at the pretty extraordinary partnership that came right before it. See, during the war, the government and the powerful trade unions, well, they formed this really unlikely alliance to help the war effort. But the second peace was declared, that whole partnership just disintegrated, turned into open hostility. And that is the story of this great unraveling.
All right, so it really all begins during the war itself. To have any chance of winning, Britain needed a constant, massive flood of munitions and supplies. And to get that, the government knew it needed one thing above all else: the absolute, total cooperation of the workforce. So what happened next was honestly a groundbreaking new deal between the state and the unions.
And that's exactly how Prime Minister David Lloyd George put it. He called the Treasury Agreement of 1915 the Great Charter for Labor. Now, you really have to understand just how huge that was. For the very first time, trade unions weren't being treated like outsiders or, troublemakers. They were officially, formally recognized as essential partners in the state, a massive shift. And in return for this new status, well, the unions made some huge sacrifices. The biggest one was accepting something called dilution. Now, what this meant was giving up these really hard-won, long-standing rules about who could do certain jobs. Suddenly, women and less skilled men were allowed to step into roles that had always been reserved for master craftsmen. It was an absolutely critical move to boost production, for sure, but man, it was also a massive leap of faith for the unions. And this new partnership, it had a profound effect. Union membership just swelled, growing by 2 million people. By the time the war ended, it was over 6 million strong. So the unions came out of the war more powerful, more representative than ever before. They really felt they had earned a legitimate seat at the national table, and you better believe they expected their wartime sacrifices to be honored once peace arrived. Except that's not what happened. That honor, it never really came. The armistice in 1918 didn't bring peace to Britain's factories and mines. Instead, it was like it lit a fuse. The post-war world quickly became a mess of rising prices, food shortages, and this deep, nagging feeling among workers that everything they'd given up was already being forgotten. And, well, the numbers really do tell the story. If you look here, you can see that strike activity actually went down in the early years of the war, right as that partnership was taking hold. But then you get to 1919. Whoa! The number of strikers more than doubles from the year before, and the number of working days lost, it absolutely explodes. And here's that explosion in a chart, and it really puts it into perspective, doesn't it? The number of working days lost to strikes just skyrockets from just under 6 million in 1918 to nearly 35 million in 1919. I mean, that's a six-fold increase in a single year. This wasn't just a few scattered arguments. This was a full-on wave of industrial warfare sweeping the country. The absolute epicenter of all this new militancy was Glasgow, which got the nickname Red Clydeside. In January of 1919, you had this massive demonstration for a 40-hour workweek, and someone raised the socialist red flag right over the main square. Now remember, this is happening right after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, so the government completely panicked. They were terrified a British Revolution was about to kick off, and that's when they sent in the troops and the tanks we saw at the very beginning. Now, Red Clydeside was incredibly dramatic, for sure. But the one single event that truly, finally shattered that wartime trust, well, that happened deep underground in the nation's coal mines. This was it. This was the moment the government's promises were put to the ultimate test. So here's what happened. To try and stop a national miners' strike in 1919, the government set up something called the Sankey Commission to investigate the whole coal industry.
The idea was simple enough: find out what's really going on and recommend a path forward. But what this actually set in motion was a political drama with some pretty devastating consequences. And the evidence that came out during this commission was just damning. It revealed the terrible, terrible living conditions of the miners and their families, for sure. But it also showed that the entire industry was hopelessly inefficient. You had something like 1,500 different owners, a lot of whom didn't have the money to modernize. And get this, on top of all that, landowners were getting paid royalties for every single ton of coal that was dug out of the ground. But maybe nothing, and I mean nothing, showed the massive gap between the owners and the workers more than this one moment. A mine owner actually told the commission that coal dust, the very thing that causes the deadly black lung disease, was actually good for miners' lungs. I mean, can you believe that? With that level of total disconnect, you can start to see why the miners felt the only real solution was to just get the owners out of the picture completely. And that's exactly why, when the government, led by Lloyd George, rejected the commission's recommendation to nationalize the mines, the miners saw it as so much more than just a policy disagreement. To them, it was a profound, gut-wrenching betrayal. Think about it. The government had seen all the evidence. Its own commission had recommended the solution, and still, they sided with the owners. The wartime social contract, it was officially dead and buried. So, in the end, Britain didn't have a revolution. But the events of 1919, and especially that bitter fight over the coal mines, left a deep, deep and lasting scar on the whole country, on its psyche and its entire industrial landscape. And the fallout was immediate and, honestly, catastrophic. If you thought those 35 million days lost in 1919 were bad, just take a look at 1921. We're talking almost 86 million working days lost to strikes. That sense of betrayal that started in the coalfields had basically poisoned industrial relations across the entire country. It led to years of bitter conflict that would eventually build up to the massive general strike of 1926. So, when you look back, yeah, the government's heavy-handed tactics and all of Lloyd George's political maneuvering did manage to stop a full-blown revolution. But the price they paid was immense. That incredible trust that was forged in the fires of war was just completely broken, and it set the stage for decades of animosity between labor, industry, and the state. And all of this leaves us with a question that, it really echoes far beyond post-war Britain. The workers back in 1918, they truly believed their sacrifice had earned them a permanent voice, a better future. Their story really forces us to ask ourselves, when a nation demands so much sacrifice in a crisis, what exactly does it owe in return? What happens when one side feels that promise has been broken?